I had been looking forward to this trip for months. A solo retreat to a quiet town, a chance to unwind, read, and sleep without distractions. I found a highly rated Airbnb, a private room in a charming old house on the outskirts of town. The host, Maria, had glowing reviews, with guests praising her hospitality and the home's cozy atmosphere. The listing showed a warm, rustic interior, wooden floors, vintage furniture, soft lighting. It seemed perfect. The house was far enough from the city to feel peaceful, but not so isolated that it felt unsafe. And for the price, it was a steal. I booked it for 4 nights, packed my bags, and set off with excitement. When I arrived, the house was exactly as described. A 2-story home with ivy creeping up the stone walls, a wide porch, and large windows that let in the afternoon light. Maria, a woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and an easy smile, greeted me at the door. "Welcome. I hope you had a smooth trip," she said, ushering me inside. The house smelled of cinnamon and fresh coffee. I took in my surroundings, the wooden staircase leading to the bedrooms, the well-stocked bookshelf by the fireplace, the dim, warm glow of old-fashioned lamps. Felt inviting, homely. "My husband, Richard, is out at the moment," Maria continued as she led me upstairs. "He's a deep sleeper, so you probably won't hear much from him." That comment stuck with me, though I didn't think much of it at the time. She showed me my room at the end of the hall. It was small but cozy, just a bed, a wooden dresser, and a nightstand with a vintage lamp. The window overlooked the backyard, where an old oak tree stood tall, its branches swaying gently in the wind. "If you need anything, just let me know," Maria said with a smile. "Bathroom is just down the hall. Feel free to make yourself at home." I thanked her, unpacked my things, and stretched out on the bed, feeling relief wash over me. This was going to be the relaxing getaway I had hoped for. I spent the evening reading in bed, occasionally listening to the faint sounds of Maria moving around downstairs. I didn't see Richard come home, but I assumed he had entered quietly through another door. By 10, exhaustion crept in and I turned off the lamp. The house was eerily quiet, aside from the distant hum of crickets outside. I curled up under the thick blanket, sinking into the kind of peaceful sleep I hadn't had in weeks. Sometime in the night, I woke up. I wasn't sure what had disturbed me at first. The room was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of the street lamp outside. Then I heard it, a faint creak, like weight shifting on an old wooden floor. I held my breath. It was coming from the hallway. I listened, heart pounding. Footsteps, slow and uneven, moved down the corridor, stopping just outside my door. I swallowed hard, telling myself it was just Maria or Richard getting up for water. But something about the way the footsteps had stopped outside my room unsettled me. A long silence followed. I turned onto my side, staring at the door, waiting. But nothing happened. No knock, no more footsteps. After what felt like forever, I convinced myself it was just my imagination, or maybe the house settling. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep. The next day passed without incident. Maria made me breakfast, and we chatted briefly before she left for work. I spent the afternoon exploring the small town, grabbing coffee at a local cafe and wandering through antique shops. By the time I returned to the house, the sun was setting. Maria was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She invited me to join her and Richard, but I politely declined, feeling the need for some solitude. "Richard's home now?" I asked casually. She nodded. "He came in late last night. You probably didn't hear him." I thought of the footsteps outside my door but decided not to mention them. Maybe I really hadn't heard him come in earlier. That night, I settled into bed, exhausted from the day. Sleep came easily. Then, once again, something woke me in the middle of the night. This time, there was no mistaking the sound. The door to my room creaked open. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Through the darkness, I saw a figure, tall, looming, standing just inside my doorway. My mind raced. Maria? No, this figure was too large. It had to be Richard. But why was he in my room? I stayed completely still, pretending to be asleep. My heart hammered in my chest. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, breathing heavily. Seconds dragged into an eternity. Then, slowly, the figure turned and walked out, closing the door behind it with a soft click. I lay there, too terrified to move, listening to the retreating footsteps. The hallway creaked, then a door shut somewhere down the corridor. I stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, waiting for sleep that never came. The next morning, I found Maria in the kitchen. She greeted me warmly, as if nothing was wrong. I hesitated before speaking. Maria, was Richard up last night? She frowned. Not that I know of. He sleeps like a rock. I hesitated. I think someone came into my room. Her face paled. She set down the mug she was holding. Are you sure? I nodded. I woke up, and someone was standing in my doorway. They didn't say anything, just stood there. She was silent for a long moment, then sighed, rubbing her temples. Oh God, I was afraid of this. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. Afraid of what? She glanced toward the stairs before lowering her voice. Richard sleepwalks. I blinked. Sleepwalks? She nodded. It's been happening more frequently. He's never done anything dangerous, but he sometimes ends up in places he shouldn't be. I'm so sorry. I should have warned you. My skin crawled. Has he ever? No, she said quickly. He never remembers anything. He usually just wanders around, then goes back to bed. I felt a mix of relief and lingering unease. He wasn't aware of what he was doing, but that didn't make it any less unsettling. I can lock my door tonight, I said finally. Maria nodded. I'll talk to him. Again, I'm really sorry. That night, I locked my door. I wedged a chair under the doorknob for good measure. I barely slept, listening for any sound in the hallway. At 2:48 a.m., the doorknob jiggled. I bolted upright, heart hammering. Soft, heavy breathing came from the other side. Then scraping, like nails dragging against wood. I didn't move, didn't speak. The sound stopped. Footsteps retreated down the hall. A door closed. I stayed awake until dawn. The next morning I left. Maria apologized profusely, but I didn't stay for pleasantries. I never booked a private room Airbnb again. I was beyond excited for my weekend getaway. After months of stress at work, I finally had the chance to escape the chaos and unwind. I had found a seemingly perfect Airbnb, an affordable modern apartment in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. The listing had glowing reviews, and the pictures showed a clean, well-lit space with all the amenities I needed. It was exactly what I was looking for. Privacy, comfort, and a break from reality. I arrived late in the evening after a long drive. The check-in process was simple. The host had left a key in a lockbox by the door, just as he had mentioned in our messages. As I stepped inside, I was immediately impressed. The space was just as advertised. A cozy living area with a sleek couch, a small but modern kitchen, and a bedroom with a large, inviting bed. The apartment had a warm, minimalistic aesthetic, and I felt at ease. After bringing my bags inside, I locked the door behind me, double-checking it just to be sure. I had never stayed in an Airbnb alone before, so I wanted to be extra cautious. Despite my excitement, there was a small part of me that was always wary about staying in someone else's home. I kicked off my shoes, set my bags down, and took a deep breath. The place smelled fresh, like newly washed linen and a hint of lavender. A small welcome note was left on the kitchen counter, along with a bottle of wine. "Enjoy your stay. Let me know if you need anything. Mark." That was the host's name. He had been friendly and responsive in our messages. Everything about the place seemed normal, perfect, even, but something didn't sit right with me. It wasn't something obvious, just a strange feeling in the back of my mind. I ignored it. I chalked it up to being tired after the long drive and brushed the feeling aside. After freshening up, I made myself comfortable on the couch, scrolling through my phone and looking up places to visit the next day. I had planned a weekend of exploring local cafes, bookstores, and a nearby hiking trail. As I sat there, the sense of unease returned. I glanced around the room. Everything looked normal. The curtains were closed, the kitchen was spotless, and the television remote was sitting neatly on the coffee table. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I laughed at myself. I was just paranoid. To distract myself, I put on a movie and poured a glass of wine. The first night in a new place always felt a little strange, but once I settled in, I knew I'd feel more at home. Still, I couldn't help but feel an odd sensation on the back of my neck, like someone's eyes were on me. The next morning, I woke up feeling much better. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, and I felt more comfortable in the apartment. Maybe I had just been on edge the night before. I spent the day exploring just as planned. I visited a charming cafe where I sat by the window, sipping my coffee and reading a book. I browsed a small bookstore and even took a walk through a nearby park. It was exactly the kind of relaxation I needed. By the time I returned to the apartment, it was already getting dark. I set my things down and went to take a shower. As the warm water washed over me, I started humming to myself, finally feeling at ease. I had locked the doors and windows before showering, reassuring myself that I was completely alone. But as I stepped out of the shower and wrapped myself in a towel, that feeling crept up again. Watched. I looked around the small bathroom. There was nothing out of the ordinary. Just a simple mirror, a white sink, and a small cabinet. Still, something wasn't right. I grabbed my phone and, on impulse, searched how to find hidden cameras in an Airbnb. A few articles popped up, listing common hiding spots, smoke detectors, electrical outlets, alarm clocks, and even picture frames. My stomach tightened as I read through the list. I decided to check. Starting with the smoke detector above the bed, I grabbed a chair and stood up, peering closely at it. It looked normal, but when I examined it more carefully, I noticed something odd. There was a small, almost invisible hole near the center. My hands grew clammy. I took my phone, turned on the flashlight, and shined it through the hole. A tiny, glimmering lens stared back at me. My breath caught in my throat. I climbed down, my heart pounding against my ribs. There was a camera. Hidden camera. I stood frozen for a moment, my mind racing. Was this the only one? I checked the electrical outlets next. There, another tiny hole in the outlet near the television. I checked the air vent in the bathroom. Another one. Each discovery sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I was being watched. My thoughts spiraled. How long had these cameras been recording me? Who had been watching? Had they been live streaming? The realization made my stomach turn. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and started recording everything: the smoke detector, the outlet, the air vent. I needed evidence. Then I grabbed my bag. I wasn't staying another second. As I threw my things together, I debated whether to confront the host. But what if he was watching me at that very moment? I didn't know how far this went. What if the cameras had microphones? I didn't want him to know I had discovered them. I needed to get out. I quietly gathered my things, my ears straining for any sound outside the apartment. Every creak, every distant footstep made my heart race. I made my way to the door, unlocked it as quietly as I could, and stepped outside. The night air was cold against my skin. I rushed to my car, throwing my bag in the back seat. As I pulled out of the driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me leave. I drove a few blocks away and parked. My fingers fumbled as I called Airbnb's customer service. A woman answered. I explained everything: how I had found hidden cameras in the apartment, how I recorded proof, how I felt completely violated. She listened, then asked me to send the footage. I did. A few minutes passed. Then she spoke, her voice firm. You need to contact the police. I spent the next few hours at the police station, filing a report. I handed over the video evidence, and they assured me they would investigate the host. Airbnb refunded me immediately and removed the listing. A few days later, I received a follow-up call. The police had searched the apartment. They found multiple hidden cameras, all transmitting to a remote server. The host was arrested. Later, I learned that he had been recording guests for months, possibly longer. Authorities were still investigating how far it went, how many people had been filmed without their knowledge. I felt sick. Even though I had escaped unharmed, the psychological damage lingered. The thought of being watched in such a vulnerable state haunted me. To this day, I check every smoke detector, every outlet, and every air vent whenever I stay somewhere new. I never ignore that feeling again. I had been looking forward to this trip for months. A solo retreat, a chance to unwind, and most importantly, a break from the constant noise of the city. The Airbnb listing was exactly what I needed. A secluded countryside home with a peaceful view of rolling fields, a quiet atmosphere, and a promise of absolute relaxation. The pictures showed a rustic but well-kept home. Wooden floors, cozy furniture, and a spacious patio overlooking acres of green farmland. The host's description emphasized the tranquility, the perfect place to escape. No neighbors for miles, it read. That sealed the deal for me. I booked it immediately. The drive took longer than expected. I left the city early in the afternoon, but a mix of winding roads and an unexpected detour meant I didn't arrive until evening. By the time I pulled up to the property, the sun was low on the horizon, casting everything in deep orange and shadowy blue. The house stood alone at the end of a dirt path, just as the listing described. From the outside, it looked exactly like the pictures. A charming wooden structure with a wraparound porch and a few porch lights glowing warmly. The land stretched far beyond the house, just open fields and patches of dense trees in the distance. I stepped out of my car and breathed in the air. It was fresh, earthy. The silence was absolute. No traffic, no sirens, no voices. Just the distant chirp of crickets and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. It was perfect. I grabbed my bags, walked up the wooden steps, and entered the house. The inside was not what I expected. At first glance, everything seemed normal. The furniture was arranged as shown in the listing, the kitchen was clean, and the air smelled faintly of wood polish. But as I stepped further in, I started noticing things. The rug in the living room was bunched up, as if it had been hastily put back in place. A couple of empty beer cans sat in the trash, despite the house supposedly being cleaned before my arrival. The air smelled stale, like it hadn't been aired out in days. I tried to ignore it. Maybe the cleaner had missed a few things. Maybe the host had stayed here recently and left in a hurry. It wasn't a big deal. I checked the bedrooms. The bed in the master room was slightly unmade. The covers were pulled back, and the pillows weren't fluffed. I frowned. I went to the bathroom. A damp towel hung over the shower rod. Not fresh, not folded, just hanging there like someone had used it and never put it away. A creeping unease settled over me. Felt like someone had been here very recently. I sent a message to the host. Hey, I just arrived. The place looks great, but I noticed a few things. like some trash, an unmade bed, and a used towel. Just wondering if someone was here before me. No immediate response. I put my phone down and decided to shake it off. Maybe the host had forgotten to check after the last guest. It wasn't the worst thing in the world. I could still enjoy my weekend. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, and sat on the couch. That's when I noticed something else. The coffee table had deep scratches, like something heavy had been dragged across it. The wooden floor near the kitchen had scuff marks, as if furniture had been moved. And worst of all, when I turned to check the small hallway leading to the bedrooms, one of the closet doors was slightly open. I hadn't checked it before. I had no reason to, but now that I noticed it, it felt wrong. I stood up slowly, my heartbeat picking up. The closet was just a small, narrow space, probably for coats or cleaning supplies. But the door being open, even a little, made my skin crawl. I walked over. I gripped the handle, pulled it open. Nothing inside, just a vacuum, some shelves, and a couple of empty hangers. I exhaled. You're being paranoid. Then my phone buzzed. Hey, so sorry about that. There was a last-minute guest before you, and I guess the cleaner didn't finish properly. Let me know if there's anything I can do to make up for it. I frowned. A last-minute guest? That didn't make sense. The listing had shown that the place was empty for a full 2 weeks before my stay. I typed back, no worries, just curious. When was the last guest here? I waited. 5 minutes. No reply. I shrugged it off. Maybe they were busy. I decided to let it go. That night, I locked my bedroom door before sleeping. I woke up at 3:12 a.m. First, I didn't know why. Then I heard it. A rustling sound. It was soft, almost like fabric moving against fabric. It was coming from outside my room. I held my breath. My heart pounded in my ears. The sound was faint, but it was there, somewhere in the hallway. I turned on my phone's flashlight and pointed it at the door. Nothing. The house was silent again. I lay there, completely still, listening. I waited for another noise, footsteps, breathing, anything, but there was nothing. After a long time, I convinced myself I had imagined it. Maybe the house was settling. Maybe it was just my paranoia. I eventually fell asleep again. Sunlight streamed through the curtains when I woke up. Everything felt normal again. I got up, showered, made some coffee, and decided to sit outside on the patio. I needed to shake off the weirdness of last night. I stepped outside. That's when I saw them. Footprints, faint but unmistakable. Dried mud, leading from the dirt driveway to the house. Panic shot through me. I hadn't walked through any mud last night. It hadn't rained. And the only way there would be muddy footprints leading to the house was if someone had walked up to the house after I arrived. My stomach twisted. I checked my car. It was fine. No signs of tampering. I checked the front door. Still locked. I walked around to the back patio, where the footprints disappeared into the grass. Had someone been here, watching me? I quickly went inside, locked all the doors, and sat on the couch, phone in hand. I texted the host again. Hey, I think someone was around the house last night. There are footprints outside that weren't there before. No response. Minutes passed. Then an answer. Hey, yeah. Sorry about that. I should have mentioned. Sometimes people rent the place out for parties. Maybe someone came back by mistake. What? The air left my lungs. I stared at my phone. What do you mean? Rent it out for parties. Another pause. Like unofficially. Some people have used it as an event space. It shouldn't be a problem. I stood up, my hands shaking. Are you saying people might have a key to this house? Silence. Then, I can refund you if you want to leave early. I grabbed my things, threw them in my car, and got out of there before the sun even set. As I pulled away, I checked the rearview mirror. The house sat there, silent and empty. But as I turned onto the main road, I thought I saw movement behind one of the windows. I didn't look back. I had always been careful when booking Airbnbs. I read the reviews, double-check the location, and even messaged the hosts beforehand to ensure everything was legitimate. But this time I was in a rush. I had planned a last-minute trip to a city I had never been to before, and in my eagerness to secure a place, I let my usual caution slip. The listing seemed perfect, a stylish, modern apartment in the heart of the city, close to all the major attractions, and at a price that was almost too good to be true. I should have paid attention to that last part. The host, Mark, had responded quickly when I inquired about availability. His messages were brief but polite, confirming that the apartment was ready and that I could check in any time after 3 p.m. I received an email from Airbnb with the booking confirmation, and everything seemed normal. Excited, I packed my bags, booked my flight, and set off, unaware that I was walking into a nightmare. When I landed, the city was alive with the buzz of people, cars honking, and the distant hum of street vendors calling out their sales. I had never been here before, but I had done some research and knew that my Airbnb was supposed to be in a nice, central neighborhood, not far from the main square. I pulled out my phone, checked the address that Mark had provided, and requested a cab. The driver seemed confused when I told him where I was going. He repeated the address, furrowed his brows, and then shrugged. "Never heard of that building," he said in broken English. "But we go, we see." I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. Maybe it was just a new building, or maybe he wasn't familiar with every street. It wasn't a big deal yet. The cab ride took longer than expected. The traffic was bad, and as we drove through unfamiliar streets, I kept glancing at my phone, watching the GPS to make sure we were headed in the right direction. Everything seemed fine at first. The streets were well lit with plenty of people walking around. But as we turned onto a smaller, quieter road, I noticed that the area started to look different. The modern, upscale buildings I had seen in the Airbnb listing photos were nowhere to be found. Instead, the streets became narrower, the sidewalks cracked and uneven. Graffiti covered some of the walls, and the buildings looked older, almost abandoned in some places. A few stray dogs roamed near a dumpster, rummaging for food. I swallowed hard. This didn't look like the neighborhood from the listing. I checked my phone again. The address was right. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the apartment was just a hidden gem in an otherwise rundown area. The photos had looked so nice, so well kept. Surely the inside of the apartment would be different. The driver slowed down as we reached what was supposed to be my destination. I looked out the window and felt my stomach drop. The building in front of me was not the sleek, modern apartment complex I had seen in the photos. Instead, it was an old, gray structure with cracked walls and broken windows. There was no sign, no lobby, just a rusted metal door that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. "Here?" I asked hesitantly. The driver nodded. "Yes, this number." I felt a cold sweat forming on my back. This couldn't be right. I checked my booking confirmation again, comparing the address. It matched. The same street name, the same building number. I hesitated before stepping out of the cab. I didn't want to believe I had been scammed, but all the signs were there. Still, I told myself that maybe the entrance was around the corner. Maybe I was looking at the back of the building instead of the front. So I got out. The second the cab drove off, the uneasy silence of the street wrapped around me. I was suddenly very alone. I pulled my suitcase along the cracked pavement and approached the rusted door. No buzzer, no nameplate, just a door. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Nothing. I pulled out my phone and dialed Mark's number. The line rang once, then twice, then The number you have dialed is not in service. My stomach twisted. I tried again, but the same automated message played. The number was fake. I felt my pulse quicken as I stepped back from the door. My brain raced through possibilities. Maybe I had the wrong building, maybe there was a side entrance, maybe. Then I noticed something else. There was a small piece of paper taped to the door, barely hanging on. I stepped closer and squinted in the dim light. It was handwritten, in rushed, almost frantic lettering. Do not book this place. It's a scam. I learned the hard way. Leave now. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a full-blown scam. I turned around quickly, looking up and down the empty street. The reality of my situation hit me like a freight train. I was in an unfamiliar city. It was getting dark. I had nowhere to stay, and I had just been scammed out of my money. I pulled out my phone and checked my Airbnb messages. Maybe Mark had sent an update. Maybe I had missed something. But as I scrolled, I noticed something chilling. His profile was gone. Not just his listing, the entire profile. His name, his reviews, his messages. Vanished. My legs felt weak. I needed to think. Fast. I checked my battery, 20%. Not great. I had no choice but to find a hotel, but I had spent most of my travel budget on the Airbnb. I quickly searched for the nearest hotel, found one a few streets away, and started walking. Every sound, every shadow made me tense up. I was dragging my suitcase behind me, feeling vulnerable, exposed. The area didn't feel safe, and I knew I needed to get out now. By the time I reached the hotel, my heart was pounding. I rushed to the front desk, praying they had a room. They did. Cost me double what I had budgeted, but I didn't care. I just needed somewhere safe. Once I was in my room, door locked, I sat on the bed and tried to calm down. I reported the scam to Airbnb, but their response was slow. They told me they would investigate but offered no immediate refund. I later learned that this scam was common. Some scammers create fake listings using stolen photos, take bookings, and disappear before Airbnb can catch on. By the time people realize they've been scammed, the money is gone, and the fake host has vanished. I spent the next few days in that expensive hotel, trying to salvage my trip. But the experience haunted me. I felt stupid, embarrassed, angry. I never got my money back, and I never booked an Airbnb without triple-checking every single detail again. If something feels too good to be true, it probably is. If the price seems suspiciously low, there's a reason. And if your gut tells you something is wrong, listen. I had always preferred Airbnb over hotels. Something about staying in a real home made traveling feel more immersive, more personal. That's why, when I planned a weekend getaway to a small coastal town, I didn't hesitate to book a charming little house listed as a cozy retreat for solo travelers. The pictures showed a well-maintained space, modern yet rustic, with warm lighting and comfortable furnishings. The reviews were all positive, and the host, a man named Daniel, had a high rating. I arrived in the late afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting golden light over the quiet streets. The house was exactly as described. Small but inviting, with a front porch covered in ivy and a single rocking chair facing the road. It was set back from the main street, giving it a secluded feel, but not so far from town that I felt isolated. Daniel had messaged me earlier, saying he wouldn't be there to greet me, but that he'd left the key in a lockbox by the front door. I found it easily, punched in the code, and let myself in. The place smelled faintly of lavender, like it had been recently cleaned. There was a welcome note on the kitchen counter. Hope you enjoy your stay. Let me know if you need anything. The house was small, just a living room, kitchen, bathroom, and a single bedroom. The decor was simple but tasteful. The bed had crisp white sheets, and a window overlooked a patch of woods behind the house. Everything seemed perfect. After settling in, I took a short walk around town, stopping at a local cafe for a sandwich and coffee. The town was peaceful, almost too quiet, but I chalked it up to being the off-season. When I returned to the house, the sun had set, and a cool breeze had rolled in from the ocean. I locked the front door, checked the windows, and settled into bed with a book. The mattress was soft, and exhaustion from traveling crept up on me quickly. Within minutes, I was asleep. I don't know what woke me up at first. It wasn't a loud noise, more like a soft creak, the kind an old house makes when it settles. But as my consciousness floated toward wakefulness, I became aware of something that sent a jolt of adrenaline through my body. The sound of the front door unlocking. I froze, my breathing shallow, my pulse hammering in my ears. For a moment, I thought maybe I had imagined it, a remnant of some dream I had been in the middle of. But then, the unmistakable sound of the door opening echoed through the small house, followed by the soft, deliberate click of it closing. Someone was inside, still frozen in bed. I listened, barely breathing. I wanted to believe it was just the house shifting, that maybe the wind had pushed the door open, but the logical part of my brain knew better. The lockbox had a code. No one should have been able to get in. Unless Daniel. I stayed completely still, my ears straining for any sound. Footsteps, slow, measured, moving through the living room toward the kitchen. I had locked the door. I was sure of it. But the fact that someone had entered so easily meant either I hadn't locked it as well as I thought, or they had another way in. My phone was on the nightstand, but reaching for it felt like a risk. Any movement, any noise, could alert whoever was in the house that I was awake. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. If it was Daniel, why hadn't he said anything? Why was he creeping around in the middle of the night? The footsteps stopped. For several agonizing seconds, there was only silence. Then, a new sound. A soft, deliberate knock. On my bedroom door. My stomach lurched. Every instinct screamed at me to stay quiet, to pretend I was asleep, but my breathing was too fast, too loud. Whoever was on the other side of that door knew I was awake. The knock came again, this time followed by a voice. "Hey, sorry to wake you." It was Daniel. His voice was calm, almost casual, but something about the way he spoke, soft, measured, sent chills down my spine. I didn't respond. My mind was caught between terror and confusion. He was my host. He had good reviews. He had no reason to be here in the middle of the night. A few seconds passed. Then the doorknob turned. Thank God I had locked the bedroom door before going to bed. I hadn't even done it intentionally. I always did, just out of habit. But now, as the knob jiggled against the lock, my heart pounded with relief. He was trying to get in. For a moment, there was silence again. Then he knocked once more. "Hey, I just needed to grab something real quick," he said through the door. "Left some things in here earlier. Won't take long." His tone was light, almost apologetic. But nothing about this situation made sense. "You left something in the bedroom?" I finally managed to say, my voice hoarse. "Yeah, just a couple of things. Can you open up real quick?" "No." "No, no, no." There was nothing of his in here. I had been in the room for hours, had checked every corner when I unpacked my bag. He was lying. I stayed silent. After a few more seconds, I heard him sigh. Then he jiggled the knob again, harder this time, like he was testing the lock. My breath caught in my throat. "You asleep?" he asked, voice still calm. I didn't answer. For what felt like an eternity, I just sat there, paralyzed in bed, listening. I heard him shift outside the door. Then, finally, the soft sound of his footsteps retreating. The living room, the front door, the lock clicking again. Silence. I stayed in bed for what must have been another hour, straining my ears for any sound. I wanted to believe he had left, but something told me he hadn't. At some point, I reached for my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type, but I managed to pull up the Airbnb app and message Daniel. "Why did you come into the house in the middle of the night?" No response. I checked the time.
2:47 Uhr nachts.
I opened the app again, went to the listing. There was an emergency contact option for Airbnb, but I hesitated. What if this was just a misunderstanding? What if he really had left something inside? No, that didn't make sense. If that were the case, he would have messaged me. He would have called, not knocked on my door like some horror movie intruder. A new sound made my breath catch. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from outside. The window was next to the bed, overlooking the woods. My heart pounded as I turned my head, terrified of what I might see. A shadow, faint but distinct, moving just beyond the glass. I grabbed my phone, this time going straight to the emergency contact page. My fingers fumbled over the screen as I tried to type. Another knock. This time it wasn't on the bedroom door. It was on the window. I hit the call button. Airbnb's emergency support picked up. I whispered into the phone, telling them what was happening. The operator stayed on the line with me as they contacted the local authorities. Minutes felt like hours. The shadow outside moved again. Then a light, flashing red and blue through the trees. I barely breathed as I heard the sound of voices, officers shouting, footsteps running, then silence. A knock at the front door, this time followed by a voice. "This is the police." Daniel was gone. The police searched the area but didn't find him. When they questioned me, I told them everything. The unlocking door, the footsteps, the knocking on my bedroom door, the figure outside the window. One officer looked grim. "You're lucky you locked your door," he said. I left the Airbnb that night, checked into the nearest hotel, and never looked back. Airbnb later banned Daniel from their platform, but I never found out what he wanted that night. I didn't want to know.